Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and to today's video where I'm going to be showing you a few quick tips and techniques for drawing tortoiseshell fur with coloured pencils. This is one that a few of you have found quite difficult, so I hope you enjoy this one. So the very first thing that I'm doing is putting down a light base layer working in the direction of the fur. So this is a pretty generic step for any kind of fur. You just want to put down a nice light base depending on your fur colour and tone. My tortoiseshell fur does have a few warm and cooler shades, so I decided to go in with a warm grey one with this. And my tortoiseshell fur is actually quite short, so I'm adding in some base layer, just using a short shading motion going back and forth following that fur direction. And then after I've done this initial layer, I then go in with the same colour pencil and I'm using a little bit more pressure onto the pencil to add in areas where you have a lot of this darker fur. So with tortoiseshell fur you tend to have areas of white, orange and black. So I'm adding in with a second layer of this pencil the areas where we have the black toned fur, or even like the really dark grey toned fur. Directly over the top of this, I'm then going in with a warm grey 4 and I'm darkening these areas. So I'm making sure that I keep these dark areas prominent throughout the creation of this particular type of fur. This is an easy way to do this because then you keep your darker areas really dark and you know where your lighter areas are. So I tend to add in the darker areas first for this particular type of fur. It's just a lot easier, and then you can continue to darken those dark areas and keep your lighter areas light. It's just a much easier way to do this. So what I tend to do for this fur is leave the really light areas really light, like the kind of white creamy tones. I leave those until the very last. So my next step here is going in with some of those orange tones. For this I'm using a burnt ochre and I'm going over that initial base of that warm grey one. And I'm building up a couple layers of this burnt ochre. I'm going in with a light pressure first of all just to kind of map out the shapes of the orange areas, and then I'm going in with a little bit more pressure and also a little bit of green gold to go over the top to give it a bit more of a yellow tone. And I'm just fleshing out those shapes, and as you can see where I've added that orange, it kind of, you almost lose some of those darker areas. So what we're going to do next is work on those darker areas. So we're going to be continuously working on our darker areas to make sure they're as dark as possible when we're starting to add in some of the other aspects of this fur as well. So I'm using a walnut brown and I'm coupling this with some dark indigo. Those two colours combine to make a really unique, really kind of deep dark tone. So you get a lot more variation and a lot more sort of character to the fur using those two particular colours together rather than going in with something straight off the bat like a dark sepia or something like that. So I'm adding in some walnut brown, and as I said, my fur for this was quite short, so I'm using really tiny short fur strokes and working in the direction of the fur. Where I am adding in the areas that overlap, so where that dark fur kind of overlaps into the light fur, I'm working in the opposite direction, so backwards into the fur, and that just gives the appearance that the white fur is kind of overlapping this dark fur. And where we have the dark fur overlapping some lighter areas, I'm obviously working in the direction of the fur. So you want to work in an opposite direction when you have the lighter colours overlapping the dark, and in the direction of the fur where you have darker colours overlapping the light. I have a video where I've drawn stripes in fur. It's a similar technique to that, so I'm going to leave that linked in the description below in case you want to check that out as well, because it's a kind of similar technique to this tortoiseshell fur here. The only difference here with tortoiseshell fur is that with the white areas we're going to be adding in a lot more of those darker colours. So to create the darker areas of this tortoiseshell fur, I'm really grouping the fur lines and all of the shading really close together. So I'm really compacting those fur lines up so that we get a really nice dark tone. When it comes to adding in the lighter fur like we're doing now, I'm just going in initially with a little bit of a lighter pencil, so I'm using a nougat rather than going in with walnut brown, and instead of really compacting those fur lines together to create a nice dark space, we want to keep them a lot more open, so you want to space them further apart so that you still have those lighter tones showing through. That's the crucial technique here, is making sure that your fur lines, when you're adding them as towards your final steps with your darker colours, that you're leaving enough space between them so that you can see that lighter colour in between. So you don't want to group your pencil strokes right next to each other. We're not building a dark colour. You want to space them far apart and you want to just slightly overlap them as well. I'm giving a little bit of a demo on the side of the sheet here as well. So that's the key element here to adding in that kind of flecked appearance with the lighter toned fur, and we want to continue that flecked appearance and adding the darker lines all over the lighter areas and blending them into the darker areas as well. That's what's going to help create that nice flecked tortoiseshell appearance, and it's going to create a really nice texture and colour pattern. As I said, we're adding in some more fur lines into the lighter area, and you might find that by adding in some tones into the lighter area that you need to go through and darken your dark colours once again. So you just want to continually observe just how dark your dark colours are, and if you need to adjust the values, perhaps you need to go through and darken your darks, or perhaps you've realised that your darks are way too dark and your light tones aren't dark enough, so you might need to add in a few more layers and group some fur lines a bit closer together in your lighter areas. So it's up to you to determine that according to your reference photo. But I just wanted to explain the short technique of creating the fur for this, so adding in those dark areas first, building in some of your mid-tones, and then working on the lighter areas, and making sure when you're working on those lighter areas, when you're adding in your fur lines, to make sure they're quite far apart so that you can see that lighter tone peeking through, so it looks like it's kind of like salt and pepper kind of flecked with that darker tone. So those are a few quick techniques and tips that I wanted to give you for tortoiseshell fur. If you want to check out the whole thing, there's a half-hour tutorial available on Patreon and to my website subscribers as well. I'm going to leave the link to both of those in the description below. Now is the absolute perfect time to sign up because it's the first of the month, so perfect time to sign up. Shameless self-plug there, but if you're thinking about it, do it today. But anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this one, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next tutorial. Bye!